today we have Peter. Peter is just going to talk about Azure DevSecOps. If I understand what he told me that he's going to speak, let's see what he has to show us. But before we start, Peter, we usually I do this together with one of the other community leaders here of the Azure User Group Portugal, but which is Pedro. But Pedro is stuck trying to solve an issue in a customer, so he will attend a little bit later today. So you got rid of. Usually Pedro has kind of a very, one last very hard question, but so it's good for you. Let's hope that he doesn't arrive. Okay. Just kidding. But yeah, so Peter, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? So I think you are, an Azure technical trainer, or do you guys already switch the name down that we got used to the name? Because Peter, by the way, he works for Microsoft. So, and we always make fun of them because one day they have a name in their position, the other day it's a different name, especially when we get used to it. Okay.
Or even a different position.
Or that one I don't know. Okay, you can even tell me if that's the case. So go ahead.
Well, no, I wouldn't say not yet in my case, but it actually happens quite often, right? Specifically when you're like in the September, early October timeframe. That's where people are typically shifting job titles and typically shifting jobs as well. But no, not in my case. So I'm still Azure technical trainer, but we should correct it a little bit because the official name for this fiscal, no surprises there, is a Microsoft technical trainer. And it means that, at least from a team perspective, not from me personally, but from a team perspective, we're expanding the portfolio, that it's not just covering Azure anymore, but it's also covering the security track, the Dynamics, and most probably the Power Apps at some point in time as well.
Okay.
So it's expanding knowledge and expanding the technical domains. So, but the core focus is still Azure technical readiness.
Okay, cool. That's cool. So one of the questions that I do is basically around Azure, and I think you're more than used to that. So what is your favorite service and why?
The favorite service.
Yeah, you can say more than one if you have like two. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
but no more than two.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if you can call it a service, but I think Azure DevOps is definitely one of my favorites in meantime. But I think it's more like a full solution platform and not always seen as a specific service as such. But on the services side, I think Azure Functions is one of the really interesting ones.
Cool.
And the reason why, well, for I guess a lot of you don't really know, but I'm coming in with like I would say 25 years, Microsoft Server background, where I started a long time ago, 96, deploying NT4 server, and then obviously moving up with each and every server version. And yeah, my day-to-day job has always been building data centers, initial physical servers, moving up to Hyper-V, VMware, and everything around it. Where the reason why I like Functions so much nowadays is because it's still doing the same thing as before, but it's a lot cheaper, it's a lot more efficient, and even an IT pro guy like myself can actually use it because you can run PowerShell scripts out of it. You can migrate your sysadmin scheduling tasks if you want into Functions. And on the other side, obviously, developers do love it as well to migrate their super legacy monolith applications in smaller running functions. So I think it's one of the cooler scenarios in a cloud environment.
Okay, cool. And another question around services. Okay, what is the service that you think is it can't be one of those because those are two very popular ones. But a service that is not so popular just because people don't know it, but is super cool. Do you have one of those? You get what I'm saying, because I have one and I can tell you mine.
Mine is start with yours.
Okay, mine. Then you get some time to think about yours. Got it. So mine is EventGrid, to be honest, because it's not very known. Lots of people don't know it, but you can build literally amazing things with it. And I've been using it for some time, and the way that it works and the integrations that I can do with it, it's amazing. But still, not a popular service by far. I don't have statistics, but it's just my gut telling me that. Okay, what about yours?
Well, honestly, I was gonna say EventGrid as well, because I mean it should be clear that I do like functions, and they're nicely working together with EventGrid. But another service is Azure Advisors, where it's one of those little underdogs, I would say. First of all, because it's a free service, and in the early days of the service, like 4 or 5 years ago, it was like super basic what it actually could help you with. Where in meantime, it's actually pretty powerful, and it helps you in literally saving money. So it's running some machine learning, cost optimization. It's going to validate security, but that's mainly based on Azure Security Center. It allows you to identify scalability, performance optimization, and overall high availability. So it's easy said, helping you to pinpoint, like not always from a technical perspective, but mainly helping like a business to just move to cloud, and once you're in cloud, to actually run it more optimized. It's like the free Azure consultant that you get in your Azure portal, basically.
No, yeah, definitely. I kind of have the same feeling, and you can't even imagine. This is for like everyone in the call. The number of times that I run that in customers, that they already had quite a few things, and just seeing and following some of the advices, namely on the performance, on the cost management part, the money that we could save, and improving the performance of their workloads. And it's something that's just there. You just need to click. It's literally, you just need to click to open it. That's it. And you get a bunch of recommendations right away. So you don't need to be that smart. Even I can use that. Okay. So.
Yeah, I remember almost 2 years ago. So in November or December, I don't remember exactly, but I was in Joburg, South Africa. And out of one of my demos during an Azure training, I showed them that I could save like $15 a year by removing a public IP address from my subscription. Because obviously what we deploy in our demo environment is pretty limited, right?
Yeah.
And just out of like the funny aspect of that demo, the CTO of the company, a finance organization, was checking back across the different subscriptions. And by lunchtime, he came back like, would you mind if I show this on screen? I'm like, no, fine, go ahead. And he could save more than 1 million.
Yeah. Exactly.
Across like 30 something subscriptions, but nevertheless, it was actually pretty impressive. And not even knowing about it. So it's just a tool telling you like, well, if you do this and this and this, that's what you're going to save. Like removing obsolete VMs that were not running anymore. Shifting virtual machine sizes to smaller VMs because the tool knows that you don't need the big beasts of servers. So pretty powerful.
One of my customers, they had several development environments. So they started Azure as a development platform for their developers, just VMs for their developers to build stuff there. That's how they started. And we run that, and we had machines. The machine learning algorithm that does that is it detects running machines that are running for more than X number of days without traffic. Okay? And they warn you about it. I don't know exactly the number of days that it is without traffic, but it's some days, doesn't matter. And they had more than 300 of those virtual machines. Okay. I don't know how much they paid because I don't know the prices that they were paying, to be honest, but 300 virtual machines that were running and no one was using them anymore because they were development environments. Developers didn't need them anymore. They were just left there. So that was it. So Pedro is here, by the way, already. So the person that I was saying bad things about him, but it's recorded, so it's fine.
That's normal. That's normal. Hi guys.
I just have one last question for Peter, and then you can do one question, Pedro, because I promise on Twitter that I will do this question. Okay. So in about a week, we're going to have an amazing event. That is the 25th anniversary of SIS internals. And they're going to do an event around that. Me and Peter, we have a friend that is going to speak. It's Sami. I just have one question for you. What is your favorite SIS internal tool that you use? If you use some.
Is that a question for Pedro or for myself?
No, it's for Peter.
No,
Peter.
it's for you. It's for you.
Okay. Well, you'll find out later on. I would say my really favorite one is Zoom It.
Yeah.
That's what I'm using every single day. There's no way I can literally do my job without. And it's one of the only ones up till now that I find out. So overnight, I got a Windows update pushed through for obvious reasons. It's a Microsoft managed device, and everything switched to Windows 11. And I was actually super surprised that it's not that it's a complex machine, but I was running Docker, the Windows subsystem for Linux. I got the Microsoft terminal tools, VS Code, Visual Studio 2019, 2022, Teams, one of the more complex tools, I guess. And everything is still working. But the only tool that didn't run anymore was Zoom It. So that was the only one I had to install again this morning. And it's been running fine throughout the day. So, but no, that's definitely my favorite.
Okay, cool. Pedro, do you have a question for Peter?
Well, guys, first of all, sorry I was late, but I was stuck on a client, and so.
Was it an Azure problem?
No, it was a DNS bind problem.
So this DNS, come on.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Facebook issue you have.
Yeah, Facebook.
Not my customer yet. Maybe one day. So Peter, I've seen that you like to share knowledge and like to teach a lot. What was your toughest audience until now?
Tiago is always a difficult one to have in your audience. No, I'm joking. The toughest audience, I think, in the last 18 months, because everything shifted to virtual from a training perspective, is the audience that's not participating. So the ones who, easy said, sign in on Monday morning, and you never hear them, you never see them, they don't have any questions. But if you ask them, like, do you get it? You go, you're not even getting any feedback. So that's, I would say, the toughest audience. Yeah. The reason why I mentioned Tiago just on the other side is that sometimes it's hard to train your colleagues. And out of like the Microsoft trainer world, Tiago has been a colleague for a couple of years already and a good friend as well. And the interesting thing is that like delivering a training or a train the trainer session to one of your peers or one of your colleagues always feels a lot harder than if it's for an audience that you don't really know about. Mm-hmm. So that's another something that I discovered over the years, that it's harder to speak to familiar faces than to unknown faces. But it's a lot more fun as well, typically. So
and the last time that we were together, Peter, I was just doing that. Remember, Zurich. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. That's definitely it. Okay, so I think we can get started with the presentation. Okay, so no more hard questions. I had some more here, but we can do it another time. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
So the floor is all yours. The stage is yours. Go ahead and share your screen and start shining.
we're gonna try and do that.
Yeah. And by the way, Peter, I call those students circles.
Circles.
Yeah.
I think I know where it comes from. Let's get rid of this little annoying thing. There we go. Good. Ready. And we're gonna move a little Thiago out of the way as well. That should be it. Good. So I would say, hey, everyone. Welcome to this session where you heard a little bit about from Thiago what I'm going to talk about. So it will be a little bit Azure oriented, but it's actually a session that could work on about any platform. And it's, I would say, pretty high level from a conceptual perspective. So it's DevSecOps, and sometimes it could be SecDevOps, sometimes it could be DevOpsSec, but that's something else. And you already know my name, Peter de Tender, based out of Belgium. And somehow I would say in between Azure Technical Trainer within Microsoft Worldwide Learning and Microsoft Technical Trainer, although I'm pretty confident for now that Azure will be and remain my playground for at least another couple of years before I'm going to shift to Dynamics or any other platform. But you obviously, you never know. Since we are using Teams, I think it's totally fine to say that whenever you have any questions or you want to interrupt, feel free to do so. So I do have Q&A all the way at the end, but you don't have to wait for that if there's like an urgent question. Not sure how it works in other sessions you're doing, but I'm totally fine with that. So feel free or post a question in chat and then we might check back every now and then. But you already heard that I do like that interaction. A silent audience is like not having an audience at all. Then it could easily be just a recorded session and posting it on YouTube anyway. So feel free to interrupt whenever you want. If you're a bit shy about asking the question, reach out on Twitter and then the whole world knows about it, not just anyone here on the call, or send me an email and then I can still open my Outlook, show it in front of the screen, and then everybody still knows about the fact that you do have a question. So there's no way around asking questions. That's the main message. So what I'm going to do is introducing a little bit on DevOps for the ones who don't know what DevOps is about. And obviously, more important, zooming in on why is security so important and where does it map in that awesome world that's called DevOps. And then last, it's probably the biggest part of the session. I'm going to try to not use PowerPoint that much and mainly walking you through some scenarios, starting pretty basic, like what would be the security analysis before you're actually running code in a pipeline. How can you optimize the pipeline from a security perspective? And eventually, how can you guarantee that anything that's actually running, that's getting deployed, is already been secured, been validated before it's putting out on the internet, and maybe having some security vulnerabilities. That would be the main flow of the next 60 minutes, I guess. So not too much about myself anymore, because you already know where I'm calling in from. You already know my name. You already know my job, where there's a little side path there. It's actually an interesting one, where the main part in my day-to-day job is literally providing Azure technical training. I still think it's one of the most clear job roles ever within Microsoft history. But next to that, and it's on top of the day-to-day job, I would say, I'm also connected to the cloud advocates and obviously zooming in on the DevOps team within that larger engineering team. And the benefit there is that obviously I can do a lot more with DevOps than what I typically provide in the weekly sessions. And it also allows me to learn about new things, about some upcoming things. And that's something that I'll talk about all the way at the end of the session, sharing some insights on a pretty new unknown preview feature, but actually pretty important from a security perspective. Apart from that, been an MCT for longer than I can remember, so that's why it's on the slide. Was an MVP for 6-7 years before I moved into the Microsoft world. And last, I'm still trying to, like you already know, presenting at user groups. So Thiago, thank you for having me once more. And apart from that, on a lot of other online channels, I got my own blog website, and every now and then still trying to find some time to write some technical books as well. where a little teaser for hopefully somewhere February, so you can already talk to your partner that if they have issues in finding a really cool gift for Valentine, I'm going to try and get my next book out, and it's mapping with DevOps, but on the next level, covering Azure Site Resiliency Engineering. Good, that's all the marketing stuff. So let's move on and do a quick recap of DevOps. Who's already familiar with DevOps? Raise your hands or just shout out. Not that many hands. Okay, totally fine. So what is DevOps? Something I didn't test, so let's see if this actually works. Not that I didn't test DevOps, it's out of my Windows 11 upgrade. I actually didn't try my whiteboard. So let's see what happens. If something happens, there we go. All those annoying pop-ups. Dun, 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 dun. But for the ones who don't know, really, there is a formal definition. It's one of the, I would say, the most beautiful ones I ever heard of. Come on, move on. Where out of Microsoft, we have Donovan Brown, one of our prime, I would say, key people within the DevOps world. And he describes DevOps as the union of people. So it's about human beings together with the process and together with products. So you have the team, you have a process like the way of working, you could say, and the products could be anything you're going to deliver to the business that's allowing you to provide more value to the business. So if you're in, I don't know, an e-commerce business, this looks completely new. Awesome. Let's say you're in an e-commerce business, and out of the last 18 months, you probably maybe even needed to switch your business to an e-commerce environment. That's where you're going to find more value in having the coolest website, the always-on website, and pleasing your customers. If you're a finance organization, it might be a little bit harder to, first of all, find customers, but you could find some optimization in migrating away from your super legacy mainframe application into something completely new, cloud-based with Event Grid to keep Thiago happy, with functions to keep myself happy, and everything in between. And that's what DevOps is about. Now, a little bit more on the technical side and the flow. It even works. Awesome. So when you think about a technical project, it starts with the brain work. You need to think and plan your scenarios. Now, before that, I can already tell you that DevOps is not just a one-time shot. So every now and then you might think about, oh, this is so cool. Hopefully after the session, you're thinking that DevOps is even more cool. And you go back to your office, to your business, and you're going to tell them like, oh my God, this is so nice. Look at that session on YouTube. And as of next week, we're going to do DevOps. And that's pretty hard because there's no such thing as just doing DevOps. Next to that, it's also not just a one-time shot. So when you move into this DevOps concept, the DevOps motion, it's literally a continuous flow. You start and you're never going to leave it anymore. And that would be a good thing, obviously. So you start with the planning phase. A lot of arrows there. No idea why, but totally fine. Interesting dynamics. So you start with the planning phase. That's where you're going to think about what is my workload? What do I want to develop? What do I want to manage? Where am I going to run my workloads? Is it going to run on-prem? Is it going to run in Azure? Is it going to be a hybrid environment? Is it integrating with AWS, Google Cloud, or any other hosting environment on the planet? Preferably spending more time on the planning than anything else, at least to get started, right? Once you know what you're going to deploy, where you're going to deploy it, you're going to reach out to your dev team and you're going to start building it. That's at least the responsibility of the development team. Next to that, there's something called zero trust, which means you shouldn't trust your planning team, you shouldn't trust your developers, but you can trust your validation. Where you could run unit testing, like having a little snippet of code that you're going to validate. Is this running? Is it not running? Maybe deploying an Azure subscription in a dev and test environment running the workload, testing it out, running some performance load testing, and eventually knowing what kind of virtual machines, app services, database sizing, and whatnot that you need on the environment. From there, you're going to move it to a build stage. Why? Because you might run it like once in Azure to just validate, is this actually working? But that's already one step too far or too fast. So you're probably out of the validation phase. You're going to move it into the build phase. What you're doing in the build phase is squeezing in all the source code together with the packages. Like if it's a .NET app, you're going to use NuGet. If it's a Java app, you're going to integrate some other package manager, similar to what you would do on your local development workstation. Once you have it in the build phase, that's eventually where you're going to run what do we call in DevOps terms release, and it means you're going to move it into a running state. Now, why am I talking about some running state? Because it doesn't always need to run in production. That's ultimately where you want to end up. I'm pretty sure that no one is really building something to never really see it in a production environment, but there could be multiple environments in between. And then last, but probably even more important, is the operations part. Let's call it monitoring, where you're going to validate how healthy is my environment running. Do I need to revise it? Because again, out of the pandemic, instead of having like 300 users every hour connecting to your e-commerce platform, all of a sudden you might have like 3,000, maybe 5,000, because it's like the only way to actually get products, right? Where all of a sudden you need to go back to the planning phase, like, oh my God, architects, we need to make it more high available because it's the only source of income we have. You need to make it more stable. You need to make it more secure, and so on and so on. And you're literally going through that motion over and over. So that's in short, I would say, the recap of DevOps. And let me know if you got any questions on that. But that brings me to, or once more back to that awesome definition, one of the nicest ones, I would say, in the industry, where it's the people organizing that continuous motion with one ultimate goal, providing more or better value to the business. Next to that, DevOps is also every now and then seen as an automation engine. Now, it's a misconception, I would say, on one side, but at some point it's actually pretty cool as well. Why? Because it's not the only goal to integrate value to the business, but one of the best ways to do that is automating, and even automating everything. But it shouldn't be the ultimate goal of DevOps. And next to that, it's not just a limitation where you go like, well, DevOps, it's just a bunch of pipelines. It's nothing more than just a bunch of scripts, and we're just going to run some automation. That would not be the exact ultimate goal of running a DevOps motion, I would say. Everything I mentioned on the whiteboard is obviously coming back. So we start with the development phase. That's where the developers are creating code. And I think that's literally building some automation, right? From there, you're going to validate. And it means running the unit testing, system testing, smoke testing, integration testing, regression testing. You got so many different tests you can go through. And from there, eventually, you're going to package it. Where the package could be a web deploy zip file for anyone ever using right-click publish in Visual Studio. That's creating the web deploy package. Or if you think about Docker containers, that's technically also a package. Or why not just FTPing source files into your server could somehow also be seen as a package. And from there, you're going to run it, and eventually you're going to operate it. So it's a linear motion. And again, it's literally going from one end to the other and repeating that same process over and over again. Now, you probably heard about pipelines. I mentioned it already a couple of times. And the pipeline is technically the engine that allows automation in your DevOps environment. So message number one for now is know why you're going to introduce DevOps. Next to that, know that it's going to be around automation, but we're obviously not done yet. Now, I told you that Donovan Brown has one of the coolest descriptions of DevOps, but the reason why I call it one of the most beautiful definitions is because I came up with my own one. I think it's always a good thing to tweak it, tune it a little bit, if it's a concept that you're truly believing in. So instead of just reusing somebody else's definition, I'm like, well, this is all fine, but I'm going to add some of my own twist into it. Not to make it better, but it's just, I would say, my cup of tea. It's literally what I'm standing for. So it's still obviously starting from integrating culture And it's even as important that starting with DevOps is even more, I would say, time intensive around integrating the culture, where only next it's actually about integrating the tooling. So it's integrating a culture to still deliver value to the business, relying on team collaboration. If nobody's working together, honestly, it's not going to work. And next to that, it's about workload automation. Where I think a good start is 60% focused on introducing the culture, integrating like what is the DevOps way of working, what is the culture before you're going to think about the tooling you're going to use. It's not that the tooling is not important. I think it's actually pretty important to know what tools you're going to use, and I'll share a lot of them just to give you some options, some ideas about capabilities later on. But I think for now, at least in the first 10, 15 minutes, I think for now it's good to say that it should be around 60% culture, 40% tooling. That's all about DevOps, but you already know the session is not just about DevOps, it's about DevSecOps, which means that from here on, we're just going to move on and integrating security in that picture. Now, what it means is when, I would say when you look at how applications are running today, or even the application lifecycle, security handling is typically happening all the way at the end. That's where you're going to find vulnerabilities. That's where the attacks are happening. That's where your servers are maybe not running an up-to-date anti-malware solution. That's where the DDoS attacks are happening, identity, credential theft. I mean, think of it, and you probably know a long list of possible attacks, but it's always happening all the way at the end, which means that it's actually already too late. Obviously, first of all, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong in handling security all the way at the end. I mean, it should be there, but it should not be the only way to handle security. So what we're going to do is, that's the second part in my session title, integrating DevSecOps, security as part of our automation flow. And what we're going to do is shifting left, which means that all of a sudden, instead of waiting for something to blow up, we're actually going to move it all the way to the beginning. And I would say preferably all the way to the beginning, but it's not always that easy. And at least moving it more left than not having security at all at the beginning. That's what we're going to do from here on. And by the way, the shifting left is actually in a industry terminology. So whenever you talk to some security vendor, when you talk to some DevOps vendor about some tooling, and you mention like how good are you supporting the shifting left mindset, if they ask you like, but what do you mean by shifting left? Then I would say just run away from that vendor because they have no idea what they're talking about. Now you can see that we're not going to change the flow. We still start from developing all the way to running something or moving to a running state. And in between, we're going to integrate security in each and every cycle. So in short, a couple of examples that I use later on for a lot of my demos is think back about the original DevOps definition. We're going to start with the planning, where planning could start with threat modeling. If you know what you're going to run, and on top of that, you know what the potential threats or the already known threats are, that's going to help you in optimizing security. If you know that you're still going to run your super fun, super legacy Windows 2000 server with like a couple of hundred or maybe 1,000, I don't know, vulnerabilities in there because it's like a 20-year-old operating system that hasn't been updated in like 10 years. I think we can all agree that it's having more vulnerabilities, or at least it's more vulnerable for system attacks or overall application attacks. So we could start with thinking about what we're going to run and what are the potential and maybe already known security risks, and starting from a modeling. Next to that, obviously, the developer task and the validation task preferably should integrate some security code scanning, where it's going to identify any vulnerabilities in packages you're using. Maybe your junior developers are not that good in handling secrets and maybe hard coding connection strings from a database in your development language source code, maybe storing storage account secrets or storage account access keys and whatnot, literally hard coded in a web config file, in an app settings JSON file or anything like that. And that's obviously not anymore what we want to do. Another really interesting one is what I call peer reviewing. It means that you're going to watch over. if you think about some other DevOps methodologies like Agile, Scrum, Kanban, and so many other ones, they're always having some peer reviewing as part of the cycle, which means that you're going to control your peers, not all of them, but maybe building up some kind of friendship, which by itself already helps in the, I would say, the DevOps culture mindset as well, forcing anyone to start working together. From there in the validation, you can move over and again, once more, running some code analysis in a slightly different way. That's also where the unit testing, smoke testing, and all the other testing I talked about is coming in, but we're going to integrate security scanning as well. Once you're going to package it, like think of infrastructure as code, running ARM templates, Bicep templates, Terraform templates, maybe creating Docker containers, where again, security is actually becoming quite important. And then once everything is almost ready to run, you could integrate the security and pen testing as well. So that's, I would say, a little handshake to the traditional network teams, specifically in like a cloud-based environment, where traditional firewall vendors are typically trying to win the fight and scaring customers about the fact that it's a lot better to keep workloads on-prem because it means, hey, you still need a physical appliance for load balancing, for firewalling, and anything else, where technically you could do the exact same and maybe even better scenarios already from a cloud perspective. But it doesn't mean that, again, you should just trust your cloud environment. And it's still that shared responsibility where you are taking part of the responsibility. It's your source code that you're going to publish in GitHub pipelines or GitHub Actions, I should say, that you're going to run in Azure pipelines that eventually you're going to run on the Azure platform. And that's where it becomes quite important. And then last but that I would say specifically for Azure, once it's actually running, you could lock down your subscriptions with overall cloud platform security. Role-based access, Azure AD, conditional access, those kind of magic tools, privileged identity management on the Azure AD, Azure identity side. But on AWS would be the same, Google Cloud would be the same, on-prem or hybrid would obviously be the same. And then last, again, in our final stage where everything is up and running, it's operating, we need to monitor, where you could use like Azure Security, Azure Security Center, Azure Sentinel, two tools helping you on the platform to find out what's going on with your environment. So that brings me to one of the first DevOps tools that's allowing you to integrate everything I talked about up till now. And we're almost at a stage where I'm going to switch to quite some demos, where the first tooling I'm going to use is Azure DevOps. If you've never seen Azure DevOps, it means that you missed a lot of Thiago's sessions, but that's up to you to figure out why you actually missed them. But Azure DevOps is a lot more than just one tooling. It's a collection of different tools, and out of the box, it's giving you like a full spectrum, allowing you to go through all those 5 motions that I just talked about with all those examples. And next to that, it also allows you to integrate third-party tools to make it even more intelligent. Not going to spend too much time on Azure DevOps itself, but it's from the start ready to integrate security, and that's what I'll walk you through. Where Azure Boards, that's the project management part, think back about the planning, where you could force your technical teams to actually create work items so the PMs could know what each and every one is working on. And again, as long as you know what everybody is working on, it means that it allows you to maybe build into intelligent documentation to make sure that you know what they're going to deploy before they actually going to deploy it, and so on and so on. That would be the main idea. The pipelines, the automation engine, I would say, together with Azure repos, that's where your source control lives, and allowing you to integrate the testing, pretty obvious, and artifacts for integrating the packages. So from here, a couple of scenarios, because I mentioned a lot of technical capabilities in like 3 slides back, but I only got 60 minutes from Thiago instead of the traditional 40 hours that I typically use to talk about DevOps. So I just handpicked a couple of demo scenarios. So we're all the way at the beginning, the planning phase, the brainstorming phase, where it means we're going to look into the threat modeling. This is what we're going to run and try to find as many potential threats before you actually going to build it. From there, once we start building it, integrating our source control, probably Git compatible with Azure repos, with GitHub repositories, that's where we're going to integrate development approval steps using branching, using pull requests with some branch security already, and integrating security code scanning in one of the first examples. And again, if there are any questions, let me know. Oh, I don't need to be here yet. I'm going to switch to a tool that looks like it's coming from the mid-90s. I hope that no one from the product team who's actually building and still updating this tool is going to watch the recording. Sometimes I forget that sessions are getting recorded and I'm always too honest, but obviously it's just joking a little bit. It's actually a pretty impressive tool. So what you can do, you download the tool, you search for Microsoft Threat Modeling. It's a free tool, which by itself is always a benefit, I would say. And it's going to give you a sample threat model. It's not the only option you have, but it's one of the easiest ones to quickly show you in like 2 minutes how it works. So you're going to start with outlining the super high level diagram of your workload topology. So in this scenario, let's see if Zoom is still working on Windows 11. Looks pretty good for now. And can I still draw as well? Ooh, maybe not. Zoom, come on, you can do it. There we go. So what I did here, and again, it's just a basic sample. This could be the workload that's running on like a web server, where you have an incoming stream over there, and you got some output, like the incoming stream on the right-hand side could be like an HTTP request. Again, think back about like an e-commerce environment scenario that I talked about at the beginning, where you already know that once you're going to run a web workload on a cloud platform or even internal data center, you need to open up some ports, right? It also means that once you're going to open up HTTPS from the outside world to your workload, that it's under attack from the first second it's running, which means we need to know what are the potential threats, what are the potential attacks. And obviously, once we know them, we're going to try and fight against them. That's on the outside. On the inside, we have about the same. So our web server or the Azure functions or anything else that you're running in AWS, Google Cloud, on-prem, not important. There's always some operating system process in place where all of a sudden this trusted boundary, our web virtual machine, database virtual machine, web server service is obviously seen as our trusted environment, but it could also be tampered with. Think of some malware that's running on a web server virtual machine, which might impact your eventual data all the way on the back, trying to steal data, trying to find credit card information in like a finance organization, or trying to find credit card details or PII information out of your healthcare application or anything like that. That would be the idea. So you're going to build up your generic workflow. And I say it's generic, but technically it can actually be a lot more than generic, because we do have quite some detailed runtimes as well. You could integrate HTTP, HTTPS. There's some Windows clients, Linux clients, and anything else, database integrations. You think of it and it's going to be there. Once you have all this in place, that's where I would say the tool actually becomes super convenient. It's going to analyze, again, starting from the generic streams, but a little bit more tailored if you want, and highlighting any potential threats that we know of. Based on the fact that this is HTTP coming in or HTTPS coming in, it means that there are already some vulnerabilities. So you could have just a couple of examples. I'll switch the color again. So there could be some spoofing in place. There could be some denial of service, like the famous DDoS attacks that luckily we block off in Azure by design, the tampering that I talked about, and so many other ones. Or you could also just pick one of these, elevation using impersonation, and that's typically a potential vulnerability where an outside connection to your web server process could actually simulate that it's a human being, but it's not a human being. It's some bot that's trying to, I don't know, sniff in people's login credentials, stuff like that. And so much more, but there's some other stuff that I need to talk about. If you already use the threat modeling or something similar that's not coming from Microsoft, feel free to let us know. Always good to know that people are actually becoming aware about security vulnerabilities and testing it out before it actually goes live. Second step in our DevOps flow is moving to our development. So I'm using a bunch of different projects. And yes, this is Azure DevOps for the ones who never seen it before, where we have Azure repos. Now, if you're a little bit into source control out of Azure DevOps or any other DevOps tool, or maybe just on your local machine, where you're going to store some source code in, why not, private GitHub repositories, it's all based on the same concept. Your developers are creating source code, continuously making changes, and instead of running your SharePoint-alike source control where you're going to create versioning yourself, you're going to rely on the power of Git, which means instead of just allowing you to make any changes, we're going to integrate some intelligence. How does this relate to security? Because you can integrate branches, creating like a side path in your development cycle, which means that your developers, instead of continuously updating the main source code, they first need to create like a little side path, creating their feature branch or their bug fixing branch or anything like that. And before you're going to accept it, you need to run some approval steps. You need to run some validation steps that I talked about. That would be the idea. So where is the security coming in? First of all, where you can on the main branch, or sometimes still called the master branch, but we're not really allowed to say that anymore, you can create branch policies, which means that no one can actually update the main branch. In a real life scenario, this would end up in a full collection of different branches. So I'm using like the PDT DevOps branch. That's the one where this person, PDT, Peter the Thunder, is working in. And I can make changes in the code. I'm going to use Azure DevOps to show you that it's not at all allowing you to update changes or make changes in the code in a DevOps way, but never do this in real life. But actually, you can directly update files from here. I'm just going to make this easy. This is a comment. I'm going to save it. I'm going to provide some description. Peter fixed Tiago's bug, like usual. I'm going to commit it, and it tells me like, oh, well, nice try, but too bad. We're not allowing you to update it. Why not? Because what it's going to do here is saving the changes. And from there, you're typically going to merge it, which means if nobody's validating the change that I made, it could actually break your production environment in the end. So how do you make this happen? You can dive in. Your lost cursor. Nice. Did we find a little bug now that we need to fix? Looks like it. We might need to ask Mark to create a new version of Zoom It for Windows 11 before the 25 years of sys internals. I'll send him a little message on that later tonight. So what you can do is go into your branches. Yes, I'm going to leave it. Where for each and every branch, you can create a branch policy. You got branch policies, you got branch security, there's some overlap in functionality, but you probably get the point. It's allowing you to protect your environments. If I would do the same from VS Code, where you go like, oh, this is all cool because you're using it from, it would be better. Directly from within Azure DevOps, then the nice thing is that it also works from your development environment. Come on, Windows 11, you're fast. Show me that you're fast. You are actually fast. Way cool. So I could make another update, and I'm actually faster in updating than code is showing what branch I'm using, but it's technically the same branch that I showed you directly from within Azure DevOps. Saving the file, that's obviously quite important to kick in source control. Or not. It's still thinking about something. Yes, you are Git repo. I know you are a Git repo, but you're not seeing it yet. I'm not going to wait for it. It is there. I mean, it's obviously not about the tool you're using. It's about the functionality in the back to protect your source code environment. The way to to integrate the changes, if you think back about that red balloon message, which would also show up in VS Code, is moving to pull requests. So what's the idea with pull requests? It's where you're going to present some kind of offering like, hey, this is a change. I'm Peter. I fixed Thiago's bug. But before we're going to push this into a production environment, I want someone to validate this, which again reflects that peer reviewing as well. So if I have a change somewhere in any of my branches, let's see if I have a branch with some change in there. Probably no changes. Come on, help me a bit. PDT something should have a change. No. There we go. So a change happened here. There's one check not validated. What is the check? It's out of that branch policy again, where I want to force anyone to review the changes that I made. What did I change? I can go back in the source code and I can see that there was a new pipeline created. Before we're going to use this pipeline, we need to run some validation. That's the responsibility of my team, where I could, for example, invite my team manager, typically the Scrum Master, if you're using Scrum, I would say, and he or she is the person who's going to approve it, validate it, or maybe, why not, maybe not even approving it, where like, oh, too bad, your pipeline is not working, it's not running yet, and we're going to reject it. Thanks for trying, but try again, right? We want you to integrate it in a slightly better way. So that's about source control. The next step is validating the overall security of your DevOps environment, because I'm jumped in, I'm using it. Yes, I do have full powers in my environment, but that's obviously not really what you want in a real life scenario. So one other tool that could help you with that, one of the so many, but I'll start with our own Microsoft one, it's a free one, is the Azure DevOps Security Scanner. It's as good, or I would say it's that good, that I cannot run it against my internal Microsoft subscription. So I need to switch to this one. Why is it not showing up in the overview? So what is Azure DevOps Scanner, or the Azure DevOps Security Scanner? That's the tool. What you need to do is just building a pipeline. And if you never build a pipeline, I can show you. It's super, super easy. It's a step-by-step process. So we talked about source control in repos, just moving on. And we're going to build a new pipeline. That's where you're going to, I would say, automate your step-by-step task. I want to pick up something from my Azure repos. That's where my source code lives. I want to use a specific branch. And I want to run some tasks. I could pick any of the pre-configured ones, where if this would be like a .NET app that I'm going to build, I need some .NET Core steps, and I probably need a few of those, depending on how well you know development, but this would be like a .NET. .NET build is fine. .NET publish. Oh, the first one is probably some NuGet magic. .NET build, publish. Oh, this is the wrong order. We're going to move it, and so on and so on. That's what a pipeline looks like. Obviously, it could be a lot more complex than this, but just showing you how easy it is to get started. Now, what you can do with that Azure DevOps built-in scanner is technically building just a fresh project and a fresh pipeline. And the only thing you need is the ADO security scanner. Where do you find it? In the list of tasks. So there's a huge amount of tasks. Graphical interface and YAML, like the coding, pipeline as code syntax is giving you about the same. If you want to migrate from classic to YAML based, there's actually some buttons allowing you to flip over the nice graphical interface into some YAML code. And you're going to search for your security tooling. Again, for now, but I got other tools coming up later on. You search for ADO and it's going to show you the security scanner. If you don't have it yet, you can go to marketplace.visual studio. Yeah, because I'm in Chrome now. I was like, you should already know that. So what is the Visual Studio Marketplace? It's where you're going to find like a couple of gazillion tools, plugins for Microsoft development tools. On-prem Visual Studio or local running Visual Studio environments, Visual Studio Code, because you can do the same thing, but you don't need the overblown Visual Studio anymore. And we allow you to integrate the exact same directly in Azure DevOps. Think back about automation. Instead of trusting your developers that they do have Visual Studio running, latest version, fully patched, and also having all those security integrations, you could now go like, hey, developer, you don't have to test the code anymore. We're going to automate it for you out of a pipeline. That's what we're doing. You search for security, super high level. We do have 79 different tools that allow you to integrate some kind of security into your DevOps environment. If you're not using Azure DevOps, but you're using Visual Studio and you search for security, you're going to see there's even more tools. Does it mean that Azure DevOps all of a sudden is like less secure? Obviously not, but not all tools that you can run on a full-blown development environment can be integrated in a DevOps pipeline scenario. That's how you have to look at it. But a lot of those tools are actually about the same. So back to my DevOps scanner. So it's not scanning one specific source code. It's actually scanning your Azure DevOps environment. So the starting point, you create a preferably new project. You integrate that ADO scanner task. You're going to run it. Takes about 3 minutes. Yes, I know it's a super small environment. I only got like 3 projects and maybe 5 pipelines or so. But what it does is literally scanning it. It's going to scan it on about anything. So what we did out of the Azure DevOps engineering product team is coming up with security best practices. It's going to scan overall organization permissions. How many personal access tokens do you have? What about service connections to Azure, to AWS, to Docker, to anywhere on the planet? What about team membership? Are you having a lot of admins having all the power? Or are you following the best practice of locking down the permissions and using the least privilege? And so much more. So that's what we're scanning here. Now, this is pretty technical, I know. So what you can do is keeping the business happy and creating a dashboard. Out of the box, this is what you get. So yes, you can customize it a little bit, but it's going to show you like super easy for project managers, maybe Scrum Masters, or why not your CTO, who's not really technical into DevOps, but he's probably still interested in finding out how secure or maybe less secure your environment is. So it's going to check the organization must be configured to authenticate users using Azure Active Directory. Cool, I'm doing that. So that's where I got a green pass. Do not enable access for external users. I invited, no, I did not. I did not invite Thiago, I invited somebody else in my environment, and that's seen as a potential security risk. Unless it's going to be like Azure AD, integrated guest user with conditional access and everything else. So that's obviously still in place. Next to that, it's going to scan your projects, it's going to scan your pipelines, it's going to try and identify any potential security risks, again, on a high level DevOps environment. Still wondering why it didn't show up in that list, but totally fine. We're moving on to the validation step, still in code scanning, but this time a little bit more advanced, I would say, not just running the overall Azure DevOps security scanning, but literally zooming in on a specific project, figuring out how healthy, how secure is my code running based on, again, integration with package management for NuGet, for Python, for Java, for Node, for Docker, allowing you to scan the source code before you're going to compile it. Also allowing you to interact with credentials. How can we store credentials? What about access keys? What about connection strings and so much more? What would be a good practice to protect them in an Azure DevOps world? And eventually ending up with some container scanning as well. This one anymore. So I'm gonna close it. And we're back here. So I talked about a marketplace. Let's go back to the marketplace. See that it was already there. security, where you have 79 results. Some of them are coming from Microsoft, a lot of them, and actually more of them are coming from more traditional vendors. A lot of them are actually pretty reputable from a security perspective. If like Snyk, just the first one, it's not the reason why it's the first one, but that tool has been around for years. There's an integration out of Snyk with Visual Studio. If you have another development environment, then you could still integrate Snyk already, like maybe 10 years ago. A recent update from Trend Micro, the traditional, I would say, devices and client and server anti-malware security tool, having some firewall engine integration and stuff like that. They recently started a partnership with Snyk for security scanning of containers as well. So that's another example. Aqua might be familiar for the ones who are working with containers again, because what Aqua gives you is specific security vulnerability scanning. If you have traditional source code that you're not moving into containers, Aqua is not going to help you. So that's I would say, the reflection of the 79 tools. How do you decide which one to go for? First of all, read the docs, check the vendor website. Maybe go back to the recording on YouTube if it's going a bit too fast, and just go through any of the potential security tools that you think could help you. I'm picking out two of them. There's one scenario, White Source Vault, another one, Sonar Cloud. Why am I using those ones? Because they are available for free. And it's not just like for free for like 1 week to test it out and then eventually turning into a super expensive tool. As long as your project is a public project, you can use the tooling for free. So that could be a good starting point. They also offer a paid version, so enterprise oriented, I would say. Start with the free edition, run it through your code scanning and figure out if it can help you and it's doing what you're looking for. When you're happy about them, then most probably you're going to move up to the paid version, because you're not going to expose your internal developed source code to like a public GitHub repo or maybe a public Azure DevOps repo. So that's the main difference. How do you integrate those tools? In a real life in-person session, I would ask someone from the audience that's not called Tiago or not Tiago Costa to come forward and actually show me how to integrate security in my pipeline. But since it's virtual, I can't really do that. But technically, it's nothing really harder than what I already showed you. You go into your existing pipeline. I have my classic pipeline. I'm going to edit my pipeline. This is my pipeline. I'm running NuGet install, NuGet restore builds, and I want to integrate Sonar Cloud. I'm going to add it here probably all the way at the end of my compile. I'm not going to run tests, or not yet, but obviously scanning before it's going to push it out and creating that package, right? That's the only thing you need. Obviously from here, there's some security in place. You need to create a integration between your Azure DevOps environment and your Sonar Cloud environment. What do you need for that? It's a personal access token. What is a personal access token? It's like a unique key that you're going to create with specific permissions, where you can define full access. Please never create a path with full access. I'll show you that in the next slide, why you shouldn't do that. What you need is, it's a code scanning tool, so we probably need some code integration where you need read access. Some tools, interesting enough, force you to have read and write permissions. Depending what the tool is doing, some of them are only capable of detecting. Some other security tools are actually helping you on fixing the problem and forcing you to update packages, identifying security vulnerabilities out of the source code, and also making the change for you. So it's a little bit of like a super senior developer helping you in writing secure code. So that's what I did for this sample Parts Unlimited project. Created my pipelines, running the pipelines, and the outcome is over here in the Sonar Cloud environment. Again, this is the free edition, so anyone could just go and play with it. If you don't like your source information going to Sonar Cloud, it's not that they're copying your source code. It's running on the Azure DevOps servers, which probably are still running in Azure Public Cloud anyway. unless you're going to build your own virtual machines to run your pipelines. That's another option. But eventually it's going to scan it as part of the pipeline and producing some metadata reporting in Sonar Cloud. So from here, just one basic example, it's going to identify 89 security hotspots. That's where your code is not as secure as it should be. It also identifies 2 major vulnerabilities, and it also identifies 91 bugs. Remember, I talked about Azure boards like the project management work items. That's where it's just going to list up the amount of bugs you have. It's not 100% guarantee for failure from a security perspective, but the more bugs you have in your application, most probably it might be more security vulnerability related as well. More interesting, I would say, and that's the power of the tool. Just one example, it's not the only one. Snyk can do the same thing, and probably one of the other 50 out of the 79 could technically give you the same experience. So what it's going to do here is highlighting your security issues. So 89 of them, and randomly picking some of them. Let's start with the major critical ones, where it's going to show you like, oh, you're using some language here, add a nested comment explaining and so on and so on. And that's using some non-supported class, I guess, why not? Or up here, there's a unexpected shorthand, whatever that means. Background after background color. No idea how your background color could be seen as a security risk, but I do trust the tool to make sure that it's actually allowing you to identify it. So that's in short what the tool is doing, allowing you to identify security threats based on outdated packages, based on the wrong source code that you copied from somewhere on the internet. I have no idea. That would be the mindset. Another example is white source, because otherwise everybody's going back home like, oh my God, we need to move to Sonar Cloud because Peter from Microsoft told us so. That's not at all the case. It's just one of the so many examples. Where white source is handling a little bit different. It's about the same as Sonar Cloud and probably the same as one of the other 50 tools, but it's also helping you on identifying open source licensing misuse. What does it mean? I mean, we all run open source applications, right? Think of NuGet packages for .NET applications. You want to integrate some specific grid control, like some nice, cool looking tables in a web form. You could use the bootstrap scenarios, but it's typically giving you that basic, ugly layout that nobody's really using anymore. So you're going to use some open source package where preferably you're going to use the latest version, but maybe for some reason you migrated your .NET 1.0 version to a 2.1 version, where now eventually you end up in a 3.1 and you're still using that outdated package. So that's where white source is going to highlight the outdated packages, and next to that giving you the recommendation. Like this is a pretty legacy package from September 2018. And this is the fix to mitigate that problem. This is like the OData connecting to some SQL database. And obviously that's mapping back with a threat modeling tool. If you know that you have a web frontend connecting to a database using SQL and whatnot, that you could first find out what you're going to use. Is it outdated? Yes or no? And so on and so on. That would be the idea. Another interesting one that typically is, I would say, asked by your security teams is, does it integrate with OWASP? Now, what is OWASP? It's an interesting security model. It's where I describe it as some kind of like consortium. It's where different major security companies are actually joining forces and coming up with guidance, best practices on how you should protect your workloads. Microsoft is a big sponsor in there. Facebook, interesting enough, is a big one. But the more traditional security companies like Trend Micro, McAfee, some load balancing companies, Barracuda, I think, is a big one. Cisco is part, and again, so many other ones, not that important. But what they're doing is sharing best practices. Now, since we're talking about DevOps, yes, they also do have best practices around DevSecOps. you could start reading this interesting website. It looks like a marketing website, but they actually have pretty nice documentation. And on top of that, they also have a security scanning tool. No surprise there. You go into your pipelines. Let's pick the same one, but could be any of them. It's got a little time check. All good, I guess. Where now you could just add a new task. You call it OWASP, and you can integrate it. So this is a proxy scan. It's typically scanning potential risks in web applications. So what's the mindset? During the build phase, you are compiling your web application, and all the way at the end, you're going to squeeze it through this OWASP security scanning. Similar to Sonar, similar to Snyk, similar to WideSource, just another tool. But think back about where it fits. We're still shifting left, because if you go to your Azure environment, one of the best practices I would say is how can I protect my web workloads from a virtual machine or app service perspective? We're going to tell you, or any Azure Cloud Solution Architect or Tiago as an Azure trainer would tell you, you need to deploy a web application firewall. That's what we're doing almost in the final state of our release cycle, right? Where you're going to publish your web application, your web VMs, and on top of that, your security teams are asking you, can you please integrate some powerful load balancer? Yes, we can in Azure. It's called Azure App Gateway, Azure Front Door. And on top of that, they're going to ask you, oh, can it also do some policy security scanning? Yeah, sure, no worries there. The funny thing is that the rule base that we provide out of the box is 100% relying on OWASP. So what we're doing here with shifting left is literally reusing the intelligence, the trusted tool from our security teams that's already running on traditional load balancing appliances today, moving into an Azure service. Yes, we offer you the same thing. And now you can reuse that already trusted tool by the security team and squeezing it into your build pipeline scenario, using the exact same topology, using the exact same characteristics, which means that all of a sudden, you might actually try and figure out, like, do we actually still need this tool running on Azure if we already have that running internally? The one and only answer is yes, you need to do that, because this is still your protection mechanism. The only thing it's going to run on the internal side during the build phase is actually validating for potential security risks and validating how healthy your server is running. Good. I think that's about it, at least for that part of the demo. Now, I talked about personal access tokens, right? Now, a few months back, it's almost 9 months ago, I got a phone call from the Microsoft security team. Now, if you're a Microsoft employee like myself, this is like one of the only teams that you don't want to get a phone call from, because it means that you are not following the Microsoft security best practices. So what happened? I delivered a training AZ400 on Microsoft DevOps technologies and literally walking my training attendees through Sonar Cloud, how to set it up, how to create a path, and from there, moving it into a running demo scenario, but a little bit more in depth because I do have 40 hours to do that. At the end of the day, 5 o'clock, what happened? I got a phone call from the Microsoft security team, and they told me like, hey, Peter, we got a question. I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah, you leaked a security credential on GitHub. No, I didn't. I'm pretty sure I did not. Do you know what kind of credential it is? Go like, yeah, it's a personal access token from DevOps. I'm like, okay. And do you have some more information? They go like, oh yeah, sure. So it's linked to your account and it got leaked like 2 minutes ago. I'm like, okay, that's interesting, but it wasn't me. I didn't do it. They go like, well, we probably should trust you because we found it in a weird repository. So what I did is literally after just a couple of minutes, they got a red flag from GitHub. So it's not a Microsoft intelligence, it's a GitHub intelligence. And on top of that, and that's why I'm talking about it, it's not because I'm a Microsoft employee that it is working. So what GitHub is doing, I'll show you the link and I'll share it in the Teams as well, or the Teams chat. So what GitHub is doing, because I already talked about Azure repos, but GitHub has a lot of similar capabilities, but that would be another session. Maybe somewhere beginning next year, Thiago, I could do the same thing, but then using GitHub and GitHub Actions. But what they're doing out of the box for public and private projects is running built-in security scanning. One of the security tools or security settings they can detect out of the box is an Azure DevOps personal access token, Azure storage account, access key, SQL Azure connection string with username and password, but also AWS security tokens and so many other things. So that's another interesting one. Let's pull up that link. I'll share it in chat. How we're doing on time, Thiago?
Very badly. You are running over 2 minutes already.
Already? Can I get more time?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
No, there's no more time.
No more time. Out of credits.
No, you can get like 5 more minutes. I think no one will mind for sure.
Oh, I was hoping for another 60 minutes.
We can do another session someday.
It's a Teams call. You don't have to pay for it. Come on. I'll charge back from the Microsoft side. No, we're actually almost there, so we're pretty good. We're pretty good. No worries. Why? Because we're almost at the last part where I could, again, you already know, talk for hours about this scenario, but this was all source code based, but technically you can do the same with containers. Why containers? Yes, they're becoming more and more important. And some of the tools that I already talked about, Snyk is one of them, Qualys is one of them, Aqua is another one, giving you container security scanning. Why is that important? Because containers are not safe. The ones you're building yourself are not safe because half of the time, if not more than half, they're actually still using open source containers coming from Docker Hub, where Docker Hub, like about a year ago, actually admitted that 90% of the containers in Docker Hub were actually known for having vulnerabilities. I'm going to skip this part of the demo because it would be about the same as what I already showed you. I promised you one last integration, so you gave me 5 minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze it in 5 minutes. Is something still pretty new. It's an Azure DevOps feature, still in preview since a couple of months, and hopefully going live anytime soon. It's going back to the beginning where you're going to start integrating your Azure DevOps environment, and you want to know who is doing what. You could already use that Azure DevOps security scanner, but in meantime, we do have something new called the audit stream. So how does it work? I'm going to save you 2 other slides and jumping in here. So what you need to do is go to your DevOps organization. Yes, obviously you need to have the correct permissions. You go into auditing, and since day one in Azure DevOps and all the versions before Azure DevOps, you had logging. Now, what is logging? It allows you to keep like audit information within Azure DevOps. Works fine, but the downside is that it's pretty static unless you do like exporting it to a CSV file and then maybe moving it into like Power BI, doing some really cool reporting, dashboarding on top, or why not moving it into a JSON file that everybody loves. But it's still pretty static and it's pretty short in time. It allows you to capture logging for 30 or 90 days. I actually think it's 30 days. Whenever do you need auditing? Probably after 30 days, because it takes a while to find out who's been misusing your environment. So what you can do with streams, and again, it's still in preview, is integrating a streaming service with Thiago's favorite one, EventGrid. Or if you like Azure Monitor out of Log Analytics, you could integrate it there, or moving it into Splunk out of your Azure DevOps environment and moving it to some third-party monitoring or SIEM solution if you want. That would be the idea. How does it work? You configure your EventGrid integration, and from there, it's just like any other, the wrong search bar. Running as an Azure service, what I built just to show you how easy it works is an EventGrid, next, finish, deploy, where I'm gonna capture it in a storage account queue. This could be a storage account overall blob scenario, this could be moving it into an Azure function where based on the auditing event, somebody's running a pipeline. He's not allowed to do that. Once the pipeline is kicking off, we're going to trigger an audit alert. And from there, we're going to run a function, a logic app, an Azure automation script to already remove that resource group, for example, before it might break your environment. So you can see the events up here. And eventually it's going to show you some nice graphs, like a lot of auditing, because I'm building demos, and that means that a lot is happening in my DevOps environment. It's storing it in a storage account queue. Come on, got 3 minutes left. Faster, portal, faster, faster. Where I can go in my queue, and I'm going to see all my messages there. The exact same thing, but this time it's somehow, I would say, kept for lifetime, or obviously depending on how long you're going to define the retention. It's a lot more dynamic because you can shift this out to your auditing teams. You could enable this for a short period of time, or you could keep it running forever, like what I'm doing, because you don't really need to pay for it, although it runs as a service, but it is actually pretty affordable. Or moving it out to your trusted SIEM solution, moving from log analytics into Sentinel, moving to Splunk, if that's what you're using, that would be the idea. So that we're back at the beginning, where I already talked about DevOps. Integrating security in the middle could also be moved even more to the left, where now I think it's still the same value out of my personal definition, but we need to integrate security from the start, which means we're going to spend more time on culture. Why? Because now our team is actually growing. We're going to integrate the security teams, but it also means that we need to focus a little bit less on the security tooling. You use Azure DevOps, you use GitHub with everything I talked about and showed, and maybe not even showed you because we don't really have the time. But the main idea is that we're going to run end-to-end automation, but we're going to focus on security. Integrating, we're not changing the flow, but we're just going to integrate security and starting all the way on the left-hand side. That's it. So with that, I would say thank you already for being here. My apologies for running a couple of minutes over time. And if you got any questions, feel free to ask them. Any questions? Questions, comments, feedback? Shy audience, everybody's gone already.
So Pedro says really cool.
That's good.
No, it was a really cool presentation.
Thank you.
I think it was pretty nice to understand the DevSecOps topic, and I'm just waiting if someone has questions on this. I saw that there was a question by Philip, which was if there was a way to export results in a more readable way, and I think he was talking about the ADO scanner. That was one of the questions, and now we have Jerome with another question. Okay, if
seems that only the Belgian people are asking questions.
The ADO scanner, so it's no, it's not really giving you a lot of like nicer exporting capabilities. Now the reporting tool, the Azure DevOps dashboards, it's yeah, nothing really more than a widget. So you could probably, but I need to look into it, but you could probably use like some REST API calls, extracting information and creating your own reporting on top of that.
And then we have Jerome that says that if the OWASP scanner, if it only runs in Linux. So he's saying Linux pipelines environments, but that's due to the only runs on Linux, if that is the case.
Well, there's a couple of different ways to actually use it. So one integration, the one that I quickly showed you, is literally grabbing some pipeline information, moving it into that OWASP engine and sending information back. Another scenario, what most customers are using, is integrating OWASP out of a Docker container. And that means you could run it all over the place, right? You could run it on your Linux build servers, you could run it on a Kubernetes cluster and scheduling it like every night I'm going to run all my pipelines through that OWASP scanner, or moving that Docker container in a cloud environment and running scannings from there. So a lot of different capabilities. So.
Cool. We also have another question from Pravin. If the notifications, it is possible to integrate on-prem tools in Azure pipelines rather than the tools running on the cloud.
Well, that's a little bit harder. The only way to do that would be creating your own DevOps build servers, which means instead of using the Azure VMs that you already have, you're going to create your own VMs. And from there, you could, like running the OWASP engine could be one example, or running the SNCC as an agent on that virtual machine and integrating it as part of the build process over there. Or shifting source code. That's what other organizations are doing. Like the prime source lives in GitHub or Azure repos, or why not any other Git compatible source control, where you first going to run a Git clone to your on-prem environment, running the scanning engine, and eventually running a Git push back to Azure repos after the scanning. That could also work.
Okay, cool. That was exactly what I was going to say, is that you can run this in so many different ways that sometimes it's kind of incredible, the flexibility that the tool has. And I've been using this since the times that it was a variable name called Visual Studio Online. Okay, and the limitations that we had before that, with so much effort from the team that builds this, nowadays it's seamless. Okay, all these integrations that we have. I just shared 2 links. The first one is the newly opened LinkedIn page that we did for the community. And the second is the next event that we have. So if you are interested, next event will be about SQL management instances. And it's going to be delivered by a colleague from Peter called Nico. Okay, and for people here in Portugal, they know Nico. Nico is Portuguese by the name, even though he has that name. Okay, is Portuguese and is now working. He's a former MVP, like Peter was an MVP too, that they got just removed their title because they went to work for Microsoft. So it's like I say, it's the best way of losing your title as an MVP is by doing that. So Nico did the same thing a couple of months ago, and he's a PM on the SQL managed instances team. So there you go, if you want to show up. And I don't know why, but now we have loads of questions, okay? So if you don't mind, Peter.
I don't have to run, so
okay.
No worries. Do you still have Teams credits to keep the call running?
Yeah, I think we can. I can just insert some more coins. Don't worry. But
Bitcoins?
Paulo
Gitcoins.
Well, let's not talk about Bitcoins with me, okay? Because it's not it's a sensible topic, okay?
No success.
Yeah, I used to mine Bitcoins, and then I said that this is going nowhere, and well, the rest is history.
That's for another session. How to not use Bitcoins.
Yeah, basically that. So Paulo is asking, scanning with tools like SonarQube can block a pipeline, or is it just for metrics? Okay, so.
Well, no, I mean, that would be the whole intention, right? Where obviously step 1 would be scanning, but obviously it becomes more relevant if you tweak and tune the security scanning engine, where once it detects something, like in the Sonar cloud, but it's technically doing the same, I could come up with a policy that if Sonar cloud metadata coming back to the pipeline tells me like, oh, this is too risky, like too many security vulnerabilities, I'm not going to allow you to complete the build in a successful way. Because obviously, what's the point about scanning if you're allowing everything else, right? Or even later on, we didn't talk about releases, but you could reuse the Sonar Cloud and SNCC and any of the other tools that I talked about and didn't talk about as a blocking mechanism for actually running releases. So, hey, Sonar Cloud or Snake or any of the other tools, what's your status code? And based on that, I'm going to allow you to run an ARM template, to publish a web app, to do whatever you want to deploy.
Yeah, and Praveen has a similar question: is if you can integrate cloud security configuration checks in the pipeline.
Yep. Or integrating with
Azure policies.
Azure policies
Yeah.
out of the quality gates, or once more integrating approvals that if there's a build stage, for example, where it's raising a red flag, that on top of that you also want someone to approve it on top. So a lot of like blocking and approval mechanisms, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then it's just comments. Great, thanks. Peter is saying that he believes that Sonar Cloud free version does not allow to block the pipeline using the gates. Okay, I'm not sure. Yeah, I needed to check, to be honest. I don't know that I only use the paid version on Sonar Cloud, so
I wouldn't rely on any free edition unless it's literally an open source free tool.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the Azure DevOps scanner, but that's not even blocking anything. But the reason why they offer it for free is obviously because it's an easy way to like sell the tool, but also an easy way to give you like some testing space. But in a real enterprise environment, like I mentioned, I would always go for the paid version, because that's where the real security capabilities are literally coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And then, to be honest, no governance would allow you to have a free tier of something that can change and doesn't have an SLA and all of those issues. Okay, so I think we're done. So
Good,
Peter,
I got one last slide where I practiced so hard.
Oh, okay, just
for my closing slide. Because I always try to adapt my sessions a little bit to the audience. So if this sounds completely wrong, then yeah, it's just because my Belgian accent, but I'm going to try to say obrigado. That's easy. Wait, obrigado por ter estado na minha sessão.